in Section A above, we, the jury, also unanimously find that the aggravating factors are sufficient to warrant a possible sentence of death.
The judge's voice echoed through the courtroom, delivering a sentence that meant only one thing: these men would never walk free again. Some sat stone-faced, refusing to show any emotion, while others clenched their fists, their jaws tightening as reality sank in. One erupted in rage, cursing at the prosecutor, while another smirked, as if prison was just another game he was prepared to play. Were they truly unbothered? Or was this just another act in the outlaw code they lived by?
That's right. Valencia is the Medford man accused of stabbing and killing his ex-girlfriend back in September of 2013.
NBC5's Roma Villavicencio is in court today when the judge issued the mistrial. She joins us live with more. Roma.
Joseph Valencia sat in the courtroom, his face unreadable as the judge delivered the sentence: 5 years behind bars. It could have been much worse. It should have been much worse. As the president of the Rhode Island chapter of the Hells Angels, Valencia had been facing charges that could have put him away for decades: attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and firing a gun in a compact area. Serious crimes that often don't come with second chances. But somehow, Valencia managed to strike a deal, walking away with what many considered a slap on the wrist.
Valencia's first trial in June also ended in a mistrial when jurors somehow got a hold of a list of names and addresses of witnesses and what they would say in their testimony.
Times witnesses trials are living.
The case stemmed from an incident outside the Hells Angels clubhouse, where Valencia fired a gun at a man he'd been feuding with. The bullet missed, but that didn't make it any less of a crime. CCTV footage captured the entire thing, leading to his swift arrest. Prosecutors pushed for a harsh sentence, especially since the shooting happened near a school. But in the end, he got just 5 years. Adam Lee Hall sat in the courtroom, his jaw clenched, as the prosecutor laid out the gruesome details of his crimes. 3 men kidnapped, tortured, and murdered. The evidence was overwhelming, but Hall wasn't about to sit there quietly and accept his fate. As the prosecutor spoke, he suddenly erupted, yelling across the courtroom, cursing at the district attorney, and insisting that he had nothing to do with the killings. His voice echoed through the tense room, but his outburst changed nothing.
Well, there you have it. Adam Lee Hall found guilty on 3 counts of murder and various other charges. He showed really no emotion. He stood with his head down and then actually sat down, just slowly shaking his head as each verdict was read from this jury.
For nearly 4 weeks, the jury had listened to disturbing testimonies. Hall, a known enforcer for the Hells Angels, had orchestrated the brutal murders, ensuring that the victims suffered before they died. Witnesses described how he dismembered the bodies and buried them, leaving no trace, except for the overwhelming evidence that eventually caught up with him.
Today, President Biden commuted the death sentences of nearly every inmate on federal death row, including one man whose name may be familiar to the people in central Louisiana. Thomas Stephen Sanders was put on death row back in September of 2014 for the 2010 kidnap and murder of 12-year-old Lexus Roberts of Las Vegas.
Stephen Sanders, once the proud president of the Hells Angels San Diego chapter, walked into the courtroom with the confidence of a man who still believed he was untouchable. He had spent years running his operations without fear, armed robbery, kidnapping, even attempting to silence witnesses who could testify against him. But on this day, he was the one fighting for his freedom.
Whose sentence was commuted by President Biden. This means he will serve the rest of his life in a federal prison without the possibility of parole.
When the judge handed down his 25-year sentence, Sanders barely flinched. Instead of accepting responsibility, he did what many high-ranking gang members tend to do. He blamed the system. In his mind, law enforcement had always been out to get the Hells Angels. He painted himself as the victim, claiming the justice system was biased, that prosecutors were obsessed with taking down the club at any cost. He insisted that he was being unfairly targeted, refusing to acknowledge the severity of his crimes.
Prosecutors say 48-year-old Jay Witt will serve a mandatory 22 and a half years in prison for killing William Furlong.
Jay Witt sat in the courtroom with the composure of a man who had faced judgment before. There was no anxiety, no nervous glances, no signs of regret. The weight of the charges against him, manslaughter for the killing of a prospective Hells Angels member inside the club's own clubhouse, should have been enough to shake anyone. But Witt remained unfazed, almost indifferent, as if he already knew how this story would play out. His expression was blank, his posture relaxed, and even as the judge prepared to deliver his sentence, there wasn't the slightest flicker of emotion.
Witt was initially charged with second-degree murder and claims it was self-defense. Just before trial, he pleaded no contest to manslaughter.
His victim had entered the clubhouse that fateful day with dreams of earning his patch, hoping to prove himself worthy of the notorious biker gang. But what happened inside those walls would never fully be known. There were no eyewitness testimonies, no cooperating witnesses, and the security footage that could have provided answers was conveniently missing. The prosecution argued that Witt had deliberately taken the man's life, while the defense insisted it was an act of self-defense. Without hard evidence, the court had no choice but to convict him on a lesser charge, manslaughter instead of murder. When the sentence was finally handed down, 30 to 40 years behind bars, Witt barely flinched. His cold, detached demeanor never wavered. He didn't plead, he didn't apologize, and he certainly didn't ask for mercy. Instead, he sat still, staring straight ahead as if he were merely waiting for the proceedings to end so he could move on to the next phase of his life. His gaze drifted over the spectators, unwavering and defiant, as if daring anyone to challenge him. It wasn't a look of regret. It was a silent statement. He had been through worse, and he would endure this too.
Prosecutors say evidence from the car incriminates Andrew Hammond. He now faces 3 murder charges for the deaths of Fernando Gonzalez, Stephen Rice, and Brandon Munoz. The men each died in separate shootings between 2020 and 2022.
The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read. 3 high-ranking Hells Angels members, Brian Wendt, Jonathan Nelson, and Russell Ott, stood motionless, showing no emotion as they were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. They had been convicted of executing fellow Hells Angels member Joel Silva in what prosecutors described as a cold and calculated murder. But despite the gravity of their crime, none of them flinched. No outbursts, no protests, not even a flicker of remorse. It was as if they had already accepted their fate long before the trial had even begun.
Hammond, thumbing through the penal code in court, faces up to life in prison. Prosecutors are walking the jury through the facts and evidence from each shooting separately. On the witness stand Tuesday, Detective Ryan Rockwell.
Joel Silva had once been a respected member of the club, but at some point, he became a problem. Maybe he knew too much. Maybe he stepped out of line. Maybe the leadership simply decided he was no longer useful. Whatever the reason, the decision was made. Silva had to go. The plan was simple, yet brutal. He was lured to the Fresno clubhouse, under the pretense of resolving a conflict. The moment he stepped inside, he never stood a chance. Wendt, the Fresno chapter president, shot him in the head, ending his life in an instant. What happened next only reinforced the club's infamous code of silence.
Andrew Hammond pulled the trigger in all 3 cases. The attorney says Hammond was always acting in self-defense.
The men didn't just kill Silva. They covered it up with the precision of a well-oiled machine. His body was disposed of, leaving no trace of the crime. For years, there were no arrests, no loose ends, no one willing to talk. But when the FBI finally pieced together enough evidence to bring the case to trial, the gang's ironclad silence remained unbroken. Even as they faced life sentences, Wendt, Nelson, and Ott refused to cooperate, sticking to the unspoken rule: never talk, never break.
Everyone knew Mambouche was a killer, and he knew everyone knew. He seemed to love it.
Maurice "Mom" Boucher wasn't just another member of the Hells Angels. He was one of the most feared and ruthless leaders the gang had ever seen. As the head of the Quebec chapter, Boucher didn't just oversee the club's activities. He built an empire of crime, violence, and absolute loyalty. Under his reign, the streets of Quebec became a battlefield, with a biker war that left over 160 people dead. Rivals, police officers, even innocent bystanders. No one was safe when Boucher wanted to send a message. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.